Hi. For my presentation, I'll be talking about LIDO, Lightweight Information Describing Objects. So first, I'll take a look at the purpose and history of LIDO. LIDO, which stands for Lightweight Information Describing Objects, is an XML-based harvesting metadata schema. It's used primarily by museums as it offers the ability to describe a wide array of materials, including natural history, fine arts, and cultural heritage objects. It's used to harvest information and metadata displayed in online collections and is intended to facilitate the sharing of information on the web. It has a multilingual attribute that supports the use of different languages. LIDO is used as the format to aggregate museum data and transform and deliver them to large repositories of cultural information and art objects, such as one called Europeana, which is a cultural heritage repository that started in Europe in the last 10 years. LIDO has a wide use in European digital humanities projects, such as Europeana, which I'll talk more about later. So LIDO was developed with the goals of resource aggregation, sharing, and description among museums and heritage collections. LIDO was specifically created to thoroughly describe cultural and art objects in a more detailed way than something like Dublin Core. As we'll see in a little bit, LIDO's descriptions of objects are highly detailed and can be very long. LIDO was first introduced in 2010 at the ICOM CIDOC conference in Shanghai, China. ICOM stands for International Council of Museums, and CIDOC for International Committee for Documentation. LIDO was developed collaboratively in part to aggregate museum data and deposit it in repositories. What eventually became LIDO began with work on other metadata schema by the art store Athena project and an investment from the J. Paul Getty Fund. Art store is widely used in the US. It's a repository for art objects. The Athena project created CWA Lite, an XML schema used to describe cultural objects and their digital representations to make information sharing among museums and universities simpler. So LIDO was developed from these pre-existing schema that were being used within the museum community already, like CWA Lite that I just talked about, CIDOC, CRM, Museum DAT, and Spectrum were all other metadata schemas that provided the groundwork for what eventually became LIDO. Also, the working group data exchange of the German Museum Association's development of Museum DAT continued this development. Among museum professionals, it was soon determined that they needed to create a single flexible metadata schema that could be used by all museums and heritage organizations that collect culturally significant objects, and who could potentially share that information with each other and other organizations all over the world. So museums create catalogs and online catalogs of their collections, which entails creating digital representations of visual objects contained within their collections. In many cases, museums and other cultural heritage institutions have their own catalogs, which are separate from everyone else's, their own content management systems and databases, which might use any number of metadata schema. This creates a fragmented terrain that's hard to navigate when institutions want to integrate related information between different collections. For example, if one museum has several Mark Rothko paintings, it would be useful to connect what they have in their collections with, say, his paintings in Houston's Menil collection. Without compatible metadata schema, the information about the works might remain discrete within their own databases, difficult to share with other museums that also own Rothko's work. So LIDO was created with this problem in mind, and it seeks to create a structured metadata schema that can serve as a standard for cultural heritage organizations and to facilitate data harvesting within the museum community. Since museums need to provide documentation and descriptions of their objects via many different platforms, and this information is often related to information stored by other museums, LIDO is kind of there to simplify the process of connecting and sharing all that information between the institutions and to make the information available using data aggregation and linked data. Ultimately, its purpose as a metadata standard is to make better, more detailed digital representations of physical objects that have long, complicated histories and are connected to a lot of other important related works. Now we'll take a look at the principles and framework behind LIDO. And as I've mentioned, the primary principle behind LIDO is to provide museum objects with accurate, detailed metadata descriptions and to make them easily collected via data aggregation. So taking a look here, this little framework shows us the different kinds of information that can be used in the schema, and 3 of these categories are mandatory: the object work type, the title and name, and the record. So we've got to know what the object is, kind of the medium, painting, sculpture, etc. The title, like Mona Lisa, or the David, and then the administrative metadata, the record for internal use and classification. So this gives us a simple outline of LIDO's description categories, which can and do become a lot more granular depending on the characteristics of the object being described. And we'll look at a few examples in a little bit. Out of those 14 information fields that we just looked at, only 3 are considered mandatory. However, the ICOM website stipulates that the following elements must be included in an object's entry, and that is the object or work type, like tableware, sculpture, painting, architecture, the title or object name, Mona Lisa or a Honda Civic, record ID is automatically assigned, administrative, and is not an inventory number. The record type, the item, collection, or series that it belongs to, and then the record source, which deals with provenance. So we'll move on to looking at the structure and major elements of LIDO now. LIDO is organized into XML containers or wrappers that describe the object identification, object classification, the type, events, relations, rights, record, and resource, such as how is the object represented digitally. So it deals with the digital object as well as the physical object. So here's a quick look at some of the many elements that LIDO can contain and how they're written. We've got the LIDO wrap, the administrative metadata, which can include a number of different classifications, along with the descriptive metadata and the object classification, and all of these are written in kind of the standard XML way of wrappers and containers in a hierarchical manner. To zoom in a little on the mandatory elements of LIDO, for the descriptive metadata, we've got, so this is contained within the descriptive metadata field, the object classification wrap. And this mandatory wrap contains crucial information that includes all classifying information about the object, its style, genre, form, age, sex, and phase, or by how an organization has it structured within its own collection, such as the fine arts object, decorative art, prints, drawings, natural science, and so on. And also contained in the descriptive metadata is the object identification wrap. And this wrap contains the item's name or title element and can contain several title set elements, though there has to be one called the appellation set that holds a string that forms the object's official title. LIDO is used by museums to provide metadata for online resources representing physical objects, as well as a way to easily aggregate data relating to the fine arts and cultural heritage institutions in a more standardized way using one schema. The metadata elements allow museum professionals to describe their holdings in great detail in a way that allows for granularity and structure in a very shareable format. LIDO seems ideal not only for art museums, but also natural history museums and archives, where collections contain physical materials that are related to wide networks of other material that might be held by other institutions. So today, it's been estimated that LIDO has been used to describe, 4.5 million objects that have been aggregated by Europeana alone, and then several other projects have used it as well to describe over 7.5 million. So we're talking about 12 million objects at least in European collections, and that's not even accounting for how it's being used in the States now. And it is being used more and more. So now let's take a look at that repository Europeana, which I've mentioned a few times. Europeana is an impressive mega collection of some of the world's most well-known artworks and cultural records, including the Mona Lisa and the collected works of Charles Darwin and Isaac Newton. So it's not just visual objects, well, not just visual art, but also literature and cultural heritage objects. Its website, Europeana.eu, is the interface for the mass aggregation of LIDO metadata and is currently in its beta form. It includes collections and multilingual exhibits. So, for example, as of February 2016, the National Library of France had added 57,483 items to the collections contained in Europeana, and the National Archives of Norway had added 459,718 objects. So these are just two examples taken from dozens of institutions that you can find listed on their page, all of whom added a minimum of 1,376 items. And that's just the bare minimum of digital objects to Europeana. So it can contain, these repositories can contain huge amounts of things that would take years to see in person. And it also helps connect all of these objects intellectually and culturally, creating a location for researchers and students to access them. So it's pretty cool. And like I mentioned, Art Store in the US does this with visual art. And that's where LIDO got its start. Another example of one of these object repositories online is called MIMO, the Musical Instrument Museums Online, and its use of LIDO serves to bring together international museums documenting the history of musical instruments. And like with Europeana, MIMO brings together a large number of digital representations. So I typed in the search term viola and was led to 2,234 results that include examples of different violas and other stringed instruments that are related to the viola. So, I don't know, compared with Europeana, MIMO seems a little bit more manageable. It's more focused on a theme, and so a little bit more user-friendly by virtue of its narrow scope. And now let's take a look at some examples of LIDO being used. And in this slide, we've got the forward-facing side of things that just kind of shows the metadata associated with the painting. This is from Yale Center for British Art. But now let's take a look at the behind the curtain scene with LIDO. And here is just a very brief screenshot taken from the record for Primavera, painting by Botticelli, and you can get a sense of how much can be included in these records. We've got a list of terms under the subject and title of the object, and it's all in German, and these are different ways of searching for this piece and kind of the different ways, different search terms that people might use, and using the multilingual function of the metadata. And these records are very long. This one, if you printed it out, would probably be about 40 pages. So this is just a quick shot of what goes on inside of LIDO. And in conclusion, while we know that metadata will never be able to replace the objects it describes, nor is it intended to, it does provide researchers with clues and valuable pieces of information that describe the context and structure of objects that might not be readily accessible in person, or that might one day be lost completely. Large-scale metadata projects, like the one that brought LIDO into being, are important to cultural heritage organizations and museums because, while not a perfect solution, they offer a way to organize and connect the millions of artworks and cultural objects held in disparate places all over the world. Thanks for listening.